This might actually work. Might actually work, which would be a great surprise. So forgive me, I am about to probably do something that is a big no-no, but I have no other way of testing. Again, I apologize for anybody watching, which I don't think anybody is, so now I can get away with it. Come on, YouTube. You scum sucker. Great. That's cool. Eternal speed. So how's the audio? Yeah, you can hear me. Alright, that's all I cared about. That's all I cared about. Can you hear me? You can. Alright, so for those, just to kind of explain what happened, because there really isn't a delay in the stream, but my capture card that I normally use for my cameras decided to die or not behave. And so there was a panic, and I still have this webcam that I use occasionally, so the webcam is filling in. Let me move my stool here that I'll be using to sit on. Alright. So I kind of wanted to just do a quick little stream and finish up my last two Panzers, a Panzer III and a Panzer IV, for Flames of War from 100 points. But also kind of show how I do weathering a little bit and the different products that I use to achieve. What I've done so far to the models is I have applied decals, painted the treads, painted the base color of the tank for both. And that's all I've done to start off with. The tank color, I have used on other tanks the DAK sand from Battlefront, which is actually Army Painter. But these two were actually painted with a base coat of Xandri dust from Citadel Colors. So they're Games Workshop paints. The treads and the extra wheel there were painted with Citadel Eshin Gray, which is one of their layer paints. And then after that, I did go over them with a shade of Citadel Nuln oil. And that isn't the normal bottle you get it in. Normally you get them in these types of bottles. But I went super fancy and put my wash in a dripper bottle. So the first thing we're going to do on these guys is we're going to do a wash on them. You can do either a pin wash, which is where it's an accurate wash where you just take your brush, dip it in the shade, and just basically line where you want to put the shade instead of washing the entire model. Like instead of like taking a big brush like this and just going, oh, slap it on. The pin wash is more precise. And sometimes I do get very messy with it, but for little small scale models like this, or even Battletech, I think it helps make it, if you're going for a weathered effect or a weathered look, I think it makes it look more like there's like maybe some panel chipping or some like grease or dirt that's around the edges. I think it helps a little bit more. So you can be as clean as you want, or as dirty as you want. And actually, to be honest, these tanks, I could varnish them right now, and they're ready to go. They're done. They've got their decals on. Their treads are painted. They don't really need a wash. Or I could slap just a nice wash on them, and they'd be ready to go. So it really comes down to how badly do you want to mess your pretty paint jobs up, or as I like to look at, how dirty you want to get your models to make them look pretty. I think, honestly, for me, the dirtier the model, the prettier it is. Something that's just strolled off the assembly line, that's great. But I like having my stuff look like it's been used. You can blame Star Wars for that, with the whole used universe thing. But definitely weathering these guys, along with like Battletech mechs or 40K vehicles or bolt action vehicles or whatever you're painting, I recommend weathering it. But that's just what I would do. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our Agrax Irk Shade, which is a shade. You could also use like a Army Painter mid-tone shade. And I think Vallejo makes like a brown shade as well. I do have the Army Painter shades on hand, but I rarely ever use them now. I do not feel like the color you get from those is as good as what you get from the Games Workshop, the Citadel. But it could be that I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid, and that might be it. Alright. So first up, I'm going to start with that cockpit. And all I'm going to do is just, because I'm not going over the entire model, I'm just doing that pin wash, or line wash, whatever you want to call it. And just going in the crevices there, around the hatch there, and on that turret I'm going to go up and down here on the crevices. And this is actually the most time consuming, and if I would have thought about it, I would have already done one of these so I could skip to the next step, but screw it, we'll do it live. And it's totally up to you where you want to put it. Again, it's your model, it's your... What I'm doing for that hatch is I'm just covering the entire hatch, because I want all the detail to pop on that one. Alternatively, you could lessen the strength of the wash by adding a little bit of water or matte medium to the wash to thin it down just a little bit. And actually what I just did now is I got a little bit of water on my brush just to kind of thin that down. And I'm not too worried about mistakes for the most part, because whatever mistakes I may make, it's going to be covered up or enhanced let me get a little bit closer in the center of the camera there when I go to do the rest of the weathering. So I'm just going to drag my brush there. Drag that there. Alright. You could wash these little indentions here. So to kind of give an example of using a little bit of water to kind of lessen it. I'm going to take a little bit of that wash and 1 drop of water. Mix that around there. I want it to be somewhat different and called out, but not too terribly dark. So just a light shade, just a hair lighter. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same actually for the vents here on this Panzer. So I'm just going to, I am just going to pour it into those little boxes there on the vents and let that sucker dry. Just a slight difference of coloration there. Alright. Alright, so on this back, let's get the rest of the top here on the turret. Now, you don't have to line wash everything. That's up to you. Again, however you want to do it. I do like to get that little top notch there where you get those little hinges. Another thing I like to do is get the underside, the underside of the turret here. And if you get too much on there, you know, you don't want it to pool or anything, just mush it around. And you can always use just straight water as a correction tool. To pick it up, so yeah. And again, notice on the back of the turret here, we got a little bit of overlap. I could leave it or I could clean it up. I'm just going to tidy it up just a little bit. But if I would have left it, it just would have been extra weathering by the time we got done with it. So, for the most part, maybe do those right there on the side, and then I think we're done with the brown wash on this tank. Let's pop that turret off. Come on. Let's just do right here. Alright. So yeah. That hole is done. And I want to drop a little bit of wash on that hatch there. Just a little bit on the turret. The other thing to keep in mind too is when I show off my other tanks that I've already completed, the weathering is going to be different on all of them. Like in terms of the inking and where I line, I use the inks, or the washes rather. But not every tank's going to look the same in the conditions. They're going to look similar. They're going to be dusty as hell. They're going to have some chipping on them, some of them. Some may actually have new panels. And so I'll actually show you that too, where you can take a product and do a modulation of color on certain panels just to give a slight variation or difference on it. So that guy's ready to go. Oh! My brand new mat. I don't want to get it dirty. That's why I have my old mat. I would say definitely my painting style though is a sloppy one. So painting the models dirty or grimy kind of plays to my strengths a little bit. It's also kind of a cheat. It's also, these are 15 mil models. Move the mic a little bit. So we want to get in here to the recesses. And I still have to paint the machine guns here on the front, because in my haste to getting these done this morning, I forgot to do that. It's okay. Alright, so I want that. Oh, and also, in addition to the Army Painter and the Citadel wash here, like I said, Vallejo makes washes, but also Battlefront sells their own brown wash as well. I cannot remember for the life of me what it's called, but if you buy one of those like starter paint sets for the Brits or the Germans, you do get them. I used them a little bit on the first couple Panzers that I did, and then gave the rest to my father-in-law, because he's doing Monty's Rats. So he needed more paints. It's interesting, and I understand why, that if you look at the paint guides in the books for mid-war, both books actually recommend getting the paints from the opposite faction paint set. Gee golly, imagine that. Please buy both paint sets. Use my thumb here and clean that up a little bit. There we go. It's just good business. Just good business. Makes perfect sense. Alright. So, I am set. Oop! In my haste. Gotta get those. And really all I want this wash to do is to pull out a little bit more detail on the model before I just take it to hell. Just a little bit more detail. Alright. And there is a reason I have not been washing inside here. I'm going to pigment the hell out of this. But if you were to wash inside here, at least for me, what I would do is just hit this big front wheel. And I would just douse it all. I mean, you could maybe do these little guys there, but I really wouldn't touch in there. That's just my opinion. Because once you start layering the pigment in there, if you go the pigment route, it's going to obscure most of this anyway. So you'll lose whatever details you do in there. I mean, you could do an amazing job of painting grime in there, but once you slap pigments in there, it'll drown that out. And then for consistency's sake, and because I think it's a good idea now, I'll just go ahead and do this wheel too. And I know the treads aren't the best painted on these. Again, the pigments and the weathering are going to pretty much take care of that. And I'm not trying to win a golden demon or anything. Alright. Alright, so this guy's still drying. I'll put that over there. So the next step is, do you want to do chipping? And there's a couple different things you could do. You could do, if you got an airbrush, you could do chipping fluid, where before I prime this, my desert color paint job, I would paint it, let's say, like a brown-ish color. And then as I was painting the normal color on, excuse me, while I'm moving my stool here, grab this guy, which you can't see until now, you would actually use the heavy chipping fluid here and kind of wipe away the outer paint to reveal the darker color underneath. Now, I didn't do that with this. A couple reasons. One, my airbrush is down. And two, for this type of scale model, you can get away with a cheaper alternative or an easier alternative than this. But I do recommend this for bigger models if you have an airbrush. This is pretty cool. Probably should do a video on that too. Let me grab a piece of foam. Alright, so in order to do chipping, you may have seen this before, you're going to need a piece of foam. I took a piece of pluck foam from one of my bare bones battle bag trays. And you can use, like I mentioned earlier, like a dark brown. So this is like the Rhinox hide. I've used this before on my mechs for the chipping. But for these, I'm actually going to use the Steel Legion drab here, which is going to be a lighter brown on that. And actually, I'm jumping the gun. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll do chipping on him, and then we'll do modulation on him. Yeah. And then I can go back and change them out while they're drying. So, check it paints. And if you've never done the foam method, all you're doing is getting a little bit of paint on the foam there. So I've got it on that corner. And you kind of want to just dab it off a little bit to where it's almost like you're dry brushing. And then you just put the chips where you want them. So I want the chips to be along the front here. So now we can see, yeah, there's been dirt and rocks kicked up. See if I can bring that up closer. And maybe a little bit back. Lights are bright. But you can see it. Like, there's a difference now. And just, I'll go along the side here. On the back. And this is how I weathered all those mercenaries for Battletech. After I got done making them having, you know, like clean paint jobs, I just took them to task with a sponge. Get a little bit more dab on there. Alright. I'm going to move the turret a little bit, and then I'm going to get that front. Oh. And then I'm going to get there. And along there. And definitely around that hatch. As much as I can. So, sweet. So we got a little bit over here on the side. We got it on the rim there. I'm going to go inside the tracks there a little bit. I need to get more. Just a little bit of color. I know it'll be there, even though it's going to be covered up by pigment. Alright, just a little bit's in there. And I'm going to save pigment to do the back of it. So I'm not going to hit this with weathering, or with the chipping. just yet. So while that's drying. So modulation, I'm not a pro at this, but basically it's the same premise of, you know, washes or glazes. Basically, all you want to do is take a lighter color and put it on certain panels here to make it look like they've replaced parts, or certain parts of the tank are newer than others. It's kind of like, did you ever have a Super Nintendo back in the day, and the top half of it turned yellow and the bottom half stayed white? You know, some types of materials, even though they're painted the same color or they're the same material, they may react differently over time to heat in the elements. So this is actually AK Interactive's filter for the Afrika core. It's their light brown for desert yellow. And this is an enamel paint. And all I'm going to do with it is I'm going to use it very sparingly, but I'm going to put it in places that I kind of want a little bit different colors. Just a different shade. And it's very subtle. I don't know if the webcam's going to pick it up. I hope it does. But it looks great in person. So like that back part there. The back hatch. Got that front panel there. Yeah. Let's do this guy back here. And that panel too. Now I haven't really gone overboard with it. This is probably, I think the limit is just doing a couple panels here and there, just to kind of get a little bit of a different color. But let's go ahead and do this door. Yeah, I think that's good. I say that and I'm about to do one more. Do this little nub. Alright, that little nubbin. And that's it. So that's going to dry. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of modulation on this one. I want to do that panel. Let's go ahead and do that little nub. Like I said, it won't be as much. Do that fuel tank. And I'm going to do that back box there. Because why not? Alright. And that's that. So once it dries, you get a slightly different tone. It's subtle. It's not going to be anything that's going to like blow your mind. It's not like you're going to see the universe or the space baby or anything like that. But it is nice. It's a nice little subtle effect. And you know it's there. Chances are your opponent will too, once they get up close and they look at it. Or if you take glamour shots of your models, you know, and post them on a Facebook group or something like that. Alright, so let's go ahead and chip this guy. Go back to the Steel Legion drab. Get our foam. And it's easy to go too heavy, but basically just go to where you're happy with it. It's your model. You get to screw it up. And I think for giggles, let's say this particular tank has seen some horrible, horrible stuff. So I'm going to get that rhinox hide in there, which is a darker brown. Got a little bit too much. All right, dab it off. And I'm going to go back over where I dabbed with the lighter brown and kind of mix it in. Now it kind of looks like a little bit of rust and paint chipping. So this tank is seeing a little bit more action. Took some hits up here. Maybe. Now, if you really wanted to get silly with it, you could take an orange paint and a dry brush, and after this is all dry, do a light orange dry brush on some of these brown parts, and you'll get a nice rust, like true rust effect. And you know what? That sounds really good. So, let me get my rust paint, my orange color. Try that out. Alright. So I am a slave to Games Workshop, so I do have a lot of their paints. So I'm going to be using the Citadel Dry, which is specifically made for dry brushing. And where did I put that dry brush? There it is. It's upside down. Derp. I got a little too much on there, but that's okay. And this took me a long time to really master, which is the dry brush, which is supposed to be the easiest technique, but for me is the hardest. I can barely gauge when I have enough paint on the brush, and normally when it comes to dry brushing, I go a little bit nuts. So yeah, I don't know if the camera can pick it out, but along that ridge line there, amongst that brown is that thin red, and then up here too. So I'm going to go a little bit more and hit that corner of that tank. All right. I just want a little bit of color, and boom, got it. Hopefully you can see it right there on that corner. So yeah, and on the front there, it's just very subtle. Like I said, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing it's there, and I could make it a lot bolder by really plowing it on there. I just don't want to do that, considering I know what's coming. But that particular tank got a little bit of rust. Alright. So a couple other products that I use is I've used, let's say for rust or for dirt washes, you know, taking something like this or these and diluting them with water to the point that they're like almost like a thin glaze. You can also use matte medium, or if you're using GW products, Lamium medium. I've done that before. I found it though, it's really easy now, and I'm actually branch out for it, but it's oil paints. You can use oil paints, and essentially if you want to dip your toe into oil paints but you're not quite sure, AK makes basically these enamels that are almost like, they react like the oil paints in a jar. Now the nice thing about the enamels is they will not react negatively to your acrylics that you use. And then when you use your white spirit on it, it will not react with your acrylics. It will only attack the enamels. So for like grime and streaking effects, I've used these guys before for it. So I'm going to use a little bit. Oh, I'm knocking down my paints here on my little thing. I'm going to use the streaking grime. And I just want a little bit. I'm going to hit that lip there. And you could probably accomplish the same thing with actually the wash if you could control it a little bit better. And so I put a little bit of that streak grime there on the top lip there. I'm going to put a little bit on the top side here. And then I'm going to put a little bit on that back end. On this Panzer, I'll put a little bit here by the vents on both sides. And then I'm going to do just that right there. And I know I'm setting a bad example for not thoroughly cleaning my brushes. So I'm going to use the white spirit. White spirit. And what it's going to do is it's going to streak that paint. So let me get my streaking brush. Yeah, my brush tank so I can properly clean my brushes. For someone who prepared hours in advance for this, I'm very ill prepared. So I'm going to get a little bit of that white spirit on the brush. And basically it's going to react with that grime. And all I'm doing is pulling it down. And it changes that color very subtly. There we go. That was a pretty good one. There we go. Cool. And the beautiful thing is, too, when you start using it around places that you've already shaded or washed, it helps fill that in a little bit more and give more color definition to it. And that's it. That's it for those guys with that. Alright. So, pigments. I'm going to let that dry just a tad there before we go into the next step. What I don't want is for the pigments to clot where it's still a little bit wet. The one thing I will say before we get started with doing the pigments is that you want to make sure that you're in a well-ventilated area. You probably should do them with a mask. I am not, because I'm an idiot. But basically, it's like crushed up chalk, and it gets everywhere. And you want to be very careful not to really do it around electronic equipment or anything like that that can like have a fan and intake it, or you just start huffing this stuff. It's not a good idea. It's kind of like leaving the cap off your super glue for hours on end. You're going to see a lot of colors, but it's not going to do you any good. The other thing is about pigments is that you can just brush them on. So they're kind of, like I said, they're made from basically chalk. They're very chalky, and they go on really well. You just brush them on, and then you move them where you want to put them. And eventually, over time, depending on how much you put on, some of it's going to fall off, right? They're not bound to the model, permanently. And so that's where you can come in with a pigment binder. Put a little pigment in a jar, or in a little hobby tin or something like that where you get your paint normally. Put a little pigment in there, put a little binder in there, and basically you can plop it exactly where you want it and exactly how much. When I started my Afrika Korp, I did not have the pigment binder. I just started slapping it on. So for consistency's sake, I will be doing the same thing with them, just slapping the pigment on, not using the binder. But in the future, in other models, I have used the binder. It makes life a lot easier trying to direct it. But I actually do like the messiness of my Afrika Korp vehicles, as they look like they've just driven straight off the desert. So something to think about. I mean, the binder is like $4 US, and the pigments themselves are $4 US. So running with it or not running with it, it doesn't really impact you either way. It's whatever you like, and so you'll be able to tell tonight whether or not you like using it without the binder. And I guess it also depends on the model too. So for the sand, we're going to be using Vallejo Pigments Desert Dust. And then for the engine exhaust on this Panzer, right there with those vents, we're going to be using the Carbon Black from Vallejo Pigments as well. So we'll go ahead and we will do the Carbon Black first. And like I said, this stuff is nasty. It gets all over the place. And I recommend you getting like a little tub, like I have right here, to do it in, because you just do not want this crap all over the place. This crap just goes everywhere. Alright, so I'm going to take my dry brush that I used earlier, and I am just going to get a little bit of that black pigment. I'm going to brush that on. And you can see almost immediately how much of an impact it has on the model. Get a little bit up there. Get a little bit more. Nice engine soot there. Cool. And then I want to do a little bit back here on the back too. And of course, you could do the underbelly too if you really wanted to, but no one's going to look at the underbelly of the tank. I mean, no one's doing, is it a boy, is it a girl checks on a tank. No one's doing that. On this guy, we're just going to do that back part. So, let's see here. And so it darkened it up considerably. There you go. So we're done with the black. And now I have cancer. Hopefully not. So now we're going to go and we're going to do the dust. And we're almost done. It does not take a lot of time to do these. Once you've got the base colors on, like that, you know, the treads, and then the machine gun, which I still got to go back and do, and then the base coat and decals. Like, really, the most laborious part was actually painting the treads, which I hated painting the treads. Of course, I hated painting the treads on my Shermans and all my GW models. I just, I don't know why. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first take that pigment and run it along top there. And then I'm going to start bringing it down. And you're going to see it start clumping in spots, and that's okay. I'm going to bring it across here. I'm going to wash it in here. So that's what I was saying. If you notice, this is a lot lighter now because of the sand. Or the pigment. And that has covered that up and obscured a lot of the detail in there. Which, I mean, to me that makes sense because the sand would get up in there, right? As the tank is moving. At least to me. And I think I've said this before. I can't remember where. But I paint these to like a Hollywood standard. Like Hollywood's version of World War II rather than historical accuracy. So for me, this works. And then I want to take a little bit, because that sand gets kicked up. And I want to brush this back. And the beautiful part about these particular Panzers with the grooves, that pigment just gets down in there and it looks real. So I'm going to take that turret off so I can just sweep this straight back. Get that out of there. And then I think that's also a neat little thing is that sometimes, depending on what pigment you use, it can act like almost as if a dry brush occurred to pick out finer details. And that's always very pleasant to see. I'm going to actually use some of this stuff that's mixed in down here. Old pigments. It is worth noting that if you want to varnish these guys, you want to varnish them before you apply the pigment. Because if you go to add varnish now, you're going to blow the pigment off. If you use an airbrush, or if you're actually hand brushing it, you're just going to move that pigment around once it gets wet. So make sure before you apply pigment, you varnish. And then if you want to make sure the pigment stays put, that's when you use the binder. If that all makes sense. Which I hope so. So we'll do the same thing. I'm going to take that turd off of Mr. Panzer here. Mr. Panzer. Oh, I got to do the other side of treads. Yeah, I forgot. You can't just have sand on one side. This son of a gun's got to be filthy all over. Let me brush that in there. Get in there. But this is just... I just feel like this is such a quick and easy cheat to make your models look really, really strong and pop. It's just kind of disgusting to me. And why I didn't discover this, what modelers have been doing for years, which that bugs the hell out of me. But now I know, and knowing is half the battle. Get that on the front treads there. Yeah, so like you can tell that there's the weathering on that up front, but it's got that sand that's covering it. Ah, it looks good. Now this might be overkill for a 15mm model, but I don't care. On the back treads, a little bit on that back, and put a little powder on that boot. On that boot, that tank boot. Go ahead and do the other treads here, going along the top. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I went overboard on that one, but that's fine. And you can handle the models that have the pigment on there, and you really won't rub it off. The only time that you may actually see like huge clumps of it come off is if you didn't brush enough down, or if you use the binder and the binder somehow gets damaged and loses its connection to the model. I mean, that's really about it. It won't smudge that badly. It won't go away. Oh, I got a question, and now I've got to run over to my computer because of how I got this set up. So let me go look at the question. Yeah, so like I was saying, that you could seal them, Havoc, with the pigment binder, or you can just set them on there. I just set them on there for these because initially I was too cheap to buy the pigment binder. But you can, moving forward, I would seal them to place them. But I've actually played a couple demo games with my already painted Afrika core, and the pigment doesn't really come off. I mean, if you sit there and lick your thumb and you start smudging, yeah, that's going to come off. Or if you've got, you know, like Cheeto fingers, maybe. But it really won't come off, even without the binder. Unless you were just really sloppy with applying it. Which, you know, for your first time, that may happen. Everybody's first time is sloppy. It's messy. It doesn't go the way you want it to. That's why you got to practice. And yes, I'm very much aware of what I just said. That's why I said it. Sloppy pigments. Alright. Get that turret on. There we go. The pigments, I've been using these guys 3-4 years now. And even though it looks like there's a lot of waste in here, it's really not that much. I think they're worthwhile, at least experimenting with. So instead of maybe buying a model 1 month, you just buy like maybe a set of pigments, or get some chalk and grind it up and do it that way too. You could try it with that. So, the last thing, and these guys are going to be almost done here, is I want to dirty up these German army logos, but the pigment, unless it's on the front with the Afrika Korp logo, didn't really touch these. And this is another cheat. And I really sound like a whore for AK Interactive. But, and I swear to God, I'm not sponsored. Lord knows, look at my credit statement. I am not getting anything from anybody here. I'm only giving. They actually make Afrika Korp dust effects in a jar. I'm not too happy with this. I'll be flat out honest with you. The only thing I find this really useful for is applying this over decals to make them look dusty. So that's how I'm going to make these crosses, these iron crosses, dusty. So you just get a little bit, move it around, and adds just a little layer of dust to it. In theory, this is supposed to act a lot like that filter, in where you can line it on the model, and as it dries, it kind of clumps up and gives it that shaded look of dust. I don't personally like it for these. I think if I was doing a like a 28mm scale model, I think this would be perfect. And also, I don't think it really jives with how I've weathered the other tanks as well. It does give a different look. It just looks nice on the decals as they dry. So I'm gonna hit that other one. Yep. That's that. Just a little dab will do ya. Weathering really isn't that hard. You're only really limited by your imagination, because even without the pigments, like if we took those completely off the board, if you had like a different yellow color, like a slightly like lighter one, you could thin it to the where you could probably get the same effects as the sand, right? You could do the chipping with paints that you already have, like a brown or a red. You don't really need to go super fancy with the other effects. Now, sometimes those make it a little bit easier, and they give different results, but you can cheat. There's just different ways to doing it. And to me, the most fun part about this hobby is experimenting with new techniques and trying different things. Like, I watch a lot of these YouTube videos, or look at Golden Demon winners, or the Adepticon painting tournament winners, and I want to know how the hell they do that, you know, or how can I cheat to get an approximation of that, because I'm not putting 120 hours into a piece, a model. I'm just not going to do that. I'll gladly put 2 hours to 15 hours into a piece, but over 15 hours into a model, I'm not going to do. And the only model to date I think I've done 15 hours on was my Nurgle Demon Prince, or maybe my Slaughter Priest. And that's because I was trying new things with them and experimenting as I went along. But as you can see here, I mean, these are done right quick. Just super duper quick. Of course, we cheated and we started off with the Morty and their base colors, but that's okay. And I guess it's time for me to paint the machine guns. And as Lord Duncan says, you know, thin your paints. So I'm going to get a little water on that. Mix it around. But if you, even if you don't play like Warhammer 40k or Warhammer Fantasy, or I'm sorry, Age of Sigmar, the Warhammer TV tips are flipping awesome. Learn a lot. Just learn so much. Alright, so let me go grab the other tanks and we'll do a family photo because these guys are done. And let me see if I can get them up close to the camera before I do that. So yeah. I love it. I think they look great and they're ready to go. Now of course I didn't do anything with the underbelly, but we already discussed that. I don't care about the sex of the tank. Grab the other tanks. But do you guys have any questions at all or anything? So, all right. Go ahead and get that out of the way. Oh no! That's fine. In fact, that tank's doing better than the rest of the Third Reich. And then there, minus my artillery, because I've got 4 88s, that's 100 points of Germans. I got a unit of Panzer 4s, a unit of Panzer 3s, and then my commander is a Panzer 3 with an additional Panzer 3 with him. And the Panzer 3 model for the lead tank is Oberst Rettmeyer. But I just like that model. I'm still very proud that I got him like a little bit of 5 o'clock shadow on his Popeye chin there. But yeah, easy peasy. Now I just need to find somebody to play. Do you guys have any questions at all or anything? I just thought I'd do this quick little video, show you guys how I do some weathering and some of the stuff I do. Alright. Let's see here. It is 8 o'clock Central. Oh, thanks, Havoc. I love them. I think they look great. I'm my own biggest fan of these. This is... it blows my mind how easy they are to paint. Now, if we were talking about like the 15mm infantry, you'd see me take these paint brushes and just gouge my eyes out because that was a nightmare painting my 101st Airborne. Ugh. Although I think I could do it better now than what I did before. I tried to do too much detail. I think less detail is better on the smaller scale you go. You want it to be recognizable from waist height. You know, looking down at the table, go, yeah, that's that. That's that. And if you can pick out a couple fine details, that's great. But like I said, not historically accurate 100%. You know, they're Hollywood accurate, which is fine. Since that's pretty much where I got my World War II education in my early life. Thank you, Dirty Dozen. Of course, I know better now, but... And does it bother anybody in Kelly's Heroes that the tanks aren't right? Or when you watch Patton, even though Patton's a really great movie, the tanks aren't right? It bothers me now. Alright. Well, I'm going to go ahead and, say goodbye and good night. But, don't be afraid to try new things. And just experiment. Find a model you really want to paint and just do something different. Or you can go back and do what I like to call a George Lucas to an older model you painted and just do some touch-ups here and there with some new techniques. So what I've done with a couple others. And it, as you grow as a painter and you try different things, you can make those older ones, look pretty good and bring them up to date a little bit without having to strip them. Alright guys, well, you have a good one, and thanks for joining and hanging out with me for a little while. If you like this, let me know, and I'll do more of them. I thought it was pretty fun, and I actually enjoyed saving 2 of these models back to finish it on the stream too, so, yep, just let me know what you think.